Girlfriend thought I'd never find out she was dating my replacement while I paid her bills. But our signed contract revealed the truth. At 31 years old, I genuinely believed I had figured out the fundamental equation of a successful relationship. My career as a software developer was thriving, bringing in a comfortable $78,000 annually. My girlfriend Rebecca and I had been together for 3 beautiful years, sharing an apartment in a quiet suburban neighborhood just outside Portland for the past 2 years. We had what I thought was a perfectly balanced partnership, the kind where you split everything 70-30 because I earned more, and she was still building her career as a junior graphic designer. I never questioned it, never resented it. That's what you do when you love someone, right? You step up, you provide, you make sure the person you care about doesn't have to stress about whether they can afford groceries or if the electricity bill will overdraft their account. I was happy to be that person for her. Completely, utterly happy. But looking back now, with the cruel clarity that only hindsight can provide, I realize I was willfully blind to the signs that had been accumulating like storm clouds on the horizon. Rebecca had started working late about 4 months ago, always with some new project that her mentor Tristan from the marketing department needed help with. Tristan this, Tristan that. Tristan thinks I have real potential. Tristan says I should consider freelancing on the side. Tristan invited the whole team out for drinks, but it's just a work thing, don't worry. I told myself I was being paranoid, that my insecurity was showing, that I needed to be supportive of her career growth. After all, wasn't that what a good partner did? Encourage their significant other's professional development without letting jealousy poison everything? So I smiled, I nodded, I told her I was proud of her, and like an absolute fool, I believed every single word that came out of her mouth. 3 weeks ago, on a completely ordinary Tuesday evening, Rebecca sat me down at our small kitchen table with the kind of serious expression that makes your stomach drop before a single word is even spoken. I could see she'd rehearsed this moment, probably in her car on the drive home, maybe even in the bathroom mirror before coming out to face me. She took a deep breath, reached across the table but didn't quite touch my hand, and delivered her carefully prepared speech with the confidence of someone who'd practiced it multiple times. She told me she needed space to find herself, that our relationship had become too comfortable, too predictable, that she was losing touch with who she was as an individual. She said we should take a relationship break. But here's the thing that absolutely shattered my understanding of how breaks work. She wanted us to stay living together because it was practical and mature and showed that we could handle complex, emotional situations like adults. I sat there, completely thunderstruck, trying to process what I was hearing. My brain was desperately attempting to make sense of the contradiction that was being presented as perfectly logical. You want to break up but keep living together, I finally managed to say, my voice sounding hollow even to my own ears. She immediately corrected me with this almost rehearsed patience that made my skin crawl. It's not breaking up, she insisted, reaching for my hand now, as if physical contact would somehow make this insanity more palatable. It's a pause, like hitting refresh on us. We stay friends, keep the apartment, and see where things go naturally. No pressure, no expectations, just two people sharing space while we figure ourselves out. The translation was so obvious it might as well have been written in neon lights across her forehead. She wanted to test drive Tristan while keeping me as her safety net, her backup plan, her comfortable financial arrangement that paid 70% of her living expenses. She wanted to have her cake, eat it too, and then come back for seconds if the first option didn't work out exactly as planned. The sheer audacity of it was almost impressive in its selfishness. But here's the thing about being completely devastated and emotionally eviscerated, sometimes it gives you this strange, crystalline clarity. I looked at her sitting there, so confident that I would just accept this arrangement because I always accepted everything she proposed. And something inside me that had been bending and bending for years finally snapped into a completely different shape. Okay, I said calmly, my voice steady in a way that surprised even me. But if we are not partners anymore, we're roommates. We need a formal agreement. She actually laughed. Not a small chuckle, but a genuine laugh that lit up her whole face like I'd just told the funniest joke she'd heard all week. You're such a dork, she said, shaking her head with that affectionate condescension I'd tolerated for so long. Fine, whatever makes you feel better. Go ahead and write up your little agreement if it helps you process this transition. I smiled back at her, but it wasn't the warm smile she was used to. Just want clear boundaries since we're starting fresh, I replied. That evening, while Rebecca was in the bedroom watching her favorite show and probably texting Tristan about how well her conversation with me had gone, I sat at my desk and drafted the most comprehensive roommate agreement I could possibly create. I researched standard roommate contracts, looked up local tenant laws, and made sure every single clause was airtight and legally sound. Nothing vindictive, nothing petty, just absolutely standard roommate arrangements that thousands of people across the country signed every single day. 50-50 split on all household expenses, effective immediately. Separate food and groceries unless explicitly agreed upon in advance. Guest policies clearly outlined, including quiet hours between 11 p.m. and 7 a.m. Shared space cleaning schedule with specific responsibilities and rotation. 30-day notice required for moving out. And my personal favorite, no overnight guests more than 2 nights per week without the other roommate's explicit written consent. The next morning, Wednesday morning, I printed 2 copies on proper paper, put them in folders, and presented them to Rebecca over coffee. She was scrolling through her phone, barely paying attention, that same amused smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "This is so extra," she said, not even reading beyond the first page before signing with a flourish that made my blood boil. "But sure, if it helps you process this change. Whatever you need to feel okay about our new arrangement." I smiled, collected both signed copies, and tucked mine away carefully. "Just establishing clear expectations for our new dynamic as roommates," I replied pleasantly. That was Wednesday. By Thursday morning, I woke up to an empty bed, and instead of falling apart like she probably expected, I methodically moved all my belongings into the spare room. Every piece of clothing, every book, every personal item that belonged to me went into that smaller space. I stripped the bed sheets from our shared bed, washed them, and left them folded on the bare mattress. Then I sat down with my laptop and got to work on what would become Rebecca's financial reality check. I calculated her exact half of the rent on our $2,200 apartment, $1,100 even. I itemized every utility bill from the past month and calculated her precise half, which came to $139 for electricity, water, gas, and internet combined. Then came the really fun part. I went through every grocery receipt from the past 2 weeks, because our agreement specified separate food going forward, and calculated the current value of the food in our shared refrigerator and pantry. Her half of the existing groceries that she'd been eating on my dime came to $218. The grand total of her first roommate invoice was $1,457. Friday morning, I left a beautifully formatted invoice on the kitchen counter with a sticky note attached that read, in my neatest handwriting, "Due by the first of the month per our signed roommate agreement. Thank you for your prompt attention to this matter." Then I went to work, feeling lighter than I had in months. She found it when she got home from what she described as a work dinner with Tristan at 11:15 that night. I was in my room, door closed, reading a book when I heard the unmistakable sound of paper being crumpled, followed by her bursting through my door without knocking. "What the hell is this?" she demanded, waving the slightly wrinkled invoice in front of my face. "Your half of our household expenses," I replied calmly, not looking up from my book. The agreement we both signed stated that costs would be split equally between roommates. That was just, she stammered, her face flushing with anger and something else. Maybe the first flicker of realization that this wasn't going to go the way she'd planned. "I thought you were being dramatic. You were making a point. I didn't think you'd actually. You literally signed a legally binding agreement," I interrupted, finally looking up at her with complete composure. "Every clause in that document is enforceable." "But you've always paid more," she protested, and I could hear the desperation creeping into her voice. "That's how we've always done things. That was when you were my girlfriend and we were partners in a relationship," I explained slowly, as if talking to someone who needed extra time to process basic concepts. "Now you're my roommate. Roommates split expenses equally. That's standard practice in literally every roommate situation in existence." Her face cycled through what had to be at least 17 distinct emotions. Shock, anger, disbelief, indignation, panic, and several others I couldn't quite identify. "I can't afford $1,257 right now," she finally said, her voice cracking slightly. Maybe you should have thoroughly considered the financial implications before suggesting we transition to a roommate arrangement, I replied, returning my attention to my book. She stormed out of my room, and I listened to her stomp down the hallway and slam her bedroom door with enough force to rattle the picture frames on the walls. About 20 minutes later, I could hear her on the phone through the thin walls, her voice pitched higher than usual with stress. "He's being such a child about this," she was saying to someone, presumably Tristan. "No, I know, right? I can totally crash at your place for a few days until he calms down and realizes how ridiculous he's being." "Wait, what do you mean your roommate wouldn't be cool with that?" "I thought you said, but you told me." Apparently Tristan's living situation wasn't quite as available as Rebecca had been led to believe. The sound of her frustrated groaning through the wall was the most satisfying thing I'd heard in weeks. Over the next several days, Rebecca's approach to our new arrangement went through what I can only describe as the 7 stages of entitled disbelief. First came the guilt-tripping phase. She made her specialty carbonara, the one I'd always loved, using ingredients that I'd purchased during the pre-agreement grocery run. She lit candles on our small dining table, wore the blue dress I'd once told her looked beautiful on her, and patted the seat next to her with a soft smile when I walked into the kitchen. "I miss us," she said, her voice dripping with manufactured vulnerability as she touched my hand across the table. "Maybe we moved too fast with this whole break thing. Maybe we should just forget about it and go back to normal." "I'm respecting your clearly stated need for space and personal growth," I replied, gently but firmly pulling my hand back from under hers. "As roommates, we should maintain appropriate boundaries to avoid confusion about the nature of our arrangement." "Don't be like that," she pleaded, her facade starting to crack around the edges. "Like what?" I asked innocently. "Like someone honoring your explicitly stated boundaries and treating you exactly the way you asked to be treated?" She huffed, stood up abruptly, and in what I can only assume was meant to be some kind of power move, ate the entire dinner herself while glaring at me from across the room. Cool, I thought, mentally calculating. That was approximately $35 worth of ingredients she just consumed out of pure spite. I added it to her running tab in my meticulously maintained spreadsheet. Then came phase 2, which I like to call practical warfare. When the first of the month arrived, Rebecca claimed she'd forgotten to transfer her half of the rent. When I reminded her, she said her banking app was glitching and she couldn't access her account. This mysterious glitch persisted for 5 consecutive days, during which time I documented every excuse via text message for my records. On day 6, I sent her a formal notice that late fees would begin accruing per standard roommate agreement penalty clauses, and suddenly her banking app miraculously started working again. But that wasn't even the best part. Rebecca started using my expensive shampoo, the $38 bottle of professional-grade product I bought because my hair gets incredibly dry in the winter. I noticed the level dropping faster than it should and caught her red-handed one morning, literally holding my bottle in the shower. I moved it to my room that same day. She complained loudly that I was being petty and unreasonable. I pointed to Section 3.2 of our signed agreement, which clearly stated that personal care items remain separate property unless explicitly shared with written consent. She called me insufferable. I called it being consistent with mutually agreed upon terms. Phase 3 was when things got really interesting. Rebecca started inviting Tristan over constantly. Not occasionally, not a few times a week, but every single night. They'd watch television in our shared living room at maximum volume, order expensive takeout that left greasy boxes scattered across every surface, and then disappear into her bedroom where they'd make noises that were so obviously intentional I almost had to admire the commitment to being petty. Almost. Instead, I started documenting everything with timestamps and decibel readings from a sound meter app on my phone. Every noise violation, every mess left in common areas, every instance of her overnight guest exceeding the 2-night-per-week limit specified in our agreement. I compiled it all into a beautiful spreadsheet with color-coded categories and detailed notes. The absolutely magnificent cherry on top of this disaster Sunday came when her mother Diane called me on a Thursday afternoon while I was working from home. I could hear the righteous indignation in her voice before she even finished her first sentence. "Rebecca tells me you're being financially abusive," she announced, as if she were a prosecutor delivering an opening statement. How exactly am I being financially abusive? I asked calmly, putting her on speaker so I could continue typing code while we talked. You're making her pay half of everything when you make significantly more than she does, Diane accused. That's exploiting the wage gap and punishing her for being earlier in her career. She wanted to be roommates, I explained with infinite patience. Roommates split household costs equally. That's how roommate arrangements work everywhere in the entire world. But you're supposed to take care of her, Diane insisted, and I could practically hear her clutching her pearls through the phone. You were together for 3 years. You can't just stop supporting her because she needed some space to grow as a person. I'm respecting her decision to pause our romantic relationship and transition to a platonic roommate arrangement, I replied, my voice perfectly level. This is exactly what she requested. I'm simply honoring her wishes and treating her like the independent adult she wanted to be treated as. This is manipulation, Diane spat. You're punishing my daughter for being honest about her needs. She literally asked for this specific arrangement, I repeated. If she's unhappy with the consequences of her own choices, perhaps she should have considered them more carefully before making such a significant request. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have work to finish. Have a great day. The line went dead with an aggressive click that probably hurt her phone more than it hurt my feelings. But Friday was when everything reached a beautiful crescendo of karma. Rebecca had her 3 closest friends over for wine night. Megan, Lauren, and Isabella showed up around 7 p.m. with multiple bottles of cheap wine and enough attitude to fill our entire apartment. They got progressively louder and more drunk as the evening went on, their conversation becoming increasingly mean-spirited and focused on what a terrible person I was. I stayed in my room with my door cracked just enough to hear everything, my phone recording the entire conversation because Oregon is a one-party consent state and I'm nothing if not thorough. I can't believe he's making you pay half of everything, Megan slurred around 8:30. That's so toxic. Men are so threatened by independent women who know their own worth, Lauren added with the sage wisdom of someone 4 glasses deep into a $10 Cabernet. You should totally sue him for emotional distress, Isabella chimed in. He even labels his food now like some kind of control freak. Like grow up and learn to share. Their voices got louder, their assessments of my character more creative. They called me everything from controlling to pathetic to literally the worst person they'd ever heard of. I kept recording, making notes of particularly egregious statements for future reference if needed. But then Rebecca said something that changed my entire strategic approach to this situation. Whatever, she announced with a false confidence that only comes from drinking too much wine too quickly. In 3 weeks when the lease renewal comes up, I'm going to tell him I'm not re-signing unless everything goes back to exactly how it was before. He can't afford this place alone on just his income. He'll cave. He always caves when I push hard enough. He's too scared of being alone to actually follow through with any of this roommate nonsense. I stopped the recording. I sat there in the dark of my room, letting her words sink in, feeling the last tiny shred of sympathy I'd been carrying evaporate like water on the hot pavement. She thought this was all temporary. She thought I was bluffing. She thought I was so desperate and pathetic that I'd eventually crumble under pressure and go back to funding her lifestyle while she explored her options with Tristan. I pulled up my laptop and started researching apartments in the area. Here's what Princess Entitled didn't know because she'd never bothered to actually understand our financial situation. I'd been saving that extra 70% I used to contribute to our expenses. Every single month for the past 2 years, I'd been putting money aside into a separate savings account. I had more than enough for a deposit on a new place, first and last month's rent, moving expenses, and a comfortable cushion beyond that. I didn't need her. I didn't need this apartment. I didn't need to cave to her manipulative tactics. I spent the entire night apartment hunting, sending inquiries, scheduling viewings for the following week. By the time the sun came up Saturday morning and Rebecca's friends finally stumbled out of our apartment, I'd found 3 promising options and had already set up appointments to see all of them. Monday afternoon, I found it. The perfect apartment in the same neighborhood, actually a nicer building with updated appliances and better sound insulation, ironically enough. The rent was $1,900 a month, $300 less than our current place, and it had in-unit laundry, which our current apartment lacked. I put down the deposit immediately, signed the lease, and got the keys on the spot because the previous tenant had broken their lease early and the landlord was motivated to fill it quickly. When I got home that evening, Rebecca was cooking dinner in our kitchen, humming along to music playing from her phone, completely oblivious to the fact that her entire plan was about to implode spectacularly. I printed out a formal notice, placed it in an envelope, and left it on the kitchen counter next to her keys. She found it an hour later while I was in my room. I heard the envelope tear, a moment of silence, and then her door slamming open as she burst into my room without knocking for what had to be the 15th time since our arrangement began. "What the hell is this?" she screamed, waving the paper at me. "That's my 30-day notice regarding the lease," I replied calmly, barely looking up from my laptop. "Per our roommate agreement, either party may terminate the living arrangement with 30 days written notice. This serves as formal notification that I will not be renewing the lease at this address. Please confirm your plans by end of day Friday so I can inform the landlord of the final disposition of the property. You can't just leave," she sputtered, her face cycling through shock and panic. "Where am I supposed to live?" "You could renew the lease yourself and find a new roommate," I suggested helpfully. "Or you could find a different place that better suits your budget and needs." "I can't afford $2,200 a month by myself," she practically shrieked. "Then perhaps Tristan could move in with you and split the costs," I offered, knowing full well what the answer would be. Her face went absolutely pale. She started, then stopped. "He has a lease. At his current place. With his roommate. He can't just break it." I replied with manufactured sympathy. "That is unfortunate. Well, you have 30 days to figure something out. I'm sure you'll come up with a solution." "You're doing this to punish me," she accused, tears starting to well up in her eyes, but they weren't sad tears. They were angry tears, frustrated tears, tears of someone realizing their manipulation wasn't working. "I'm doing this because I want to live somewhere without hearing my ex-girlfriend have performatively loud sex through the walls every single night," I said bluntly. "You wanted space. You wanted independence. You wanted to be roommates instead of partners. Well, congratulations. Roommates move out sometimes. This is how adult roommate arrangements end when they're not working for one or both parties." She slammed my door so hard when she left that a framed photo of my college graduation fell off the wall and shattered on the floor. I added the cost of the frame to her outstanding expenses tab, took a photo of the damage for documentation purposes, and went back to planning my move. That night, I heard every word of her meltdown to Tristan through the walls. "He's actually abandoning me," she sobbed into her phone. "Can't you get out of your lease early? What do you mean you'd have to pay 3 months' rent as a penalty? Why can't I just stay at your place?" "What do you mean she wouldn't be comfortable with that?" "Who's she?" "Your roommate is a woman. You told me you lived with a guy named Marcus." The conversation deteriorated from there. Apparently Tristan's roommate situation was significantly more complicated than he'd led Rebecca to believe. Shocking, truly shocking. Wednesday brought a new tactical approach from Rebecca. I came home from work to find my entire gaming setup, PlayStation, monitor, controller, games, all relocated to the living room with a sign taped to the monitor that read in bubbly handwriting, "Communal property now. Share and share alike." I took detailed photos from multiple angles, documented the exact arrangement and condition of all items, then moved everything back to my room. I left her an invoice for $75, unauthorized touching and relocation of personal property fee as outlined in Section 4.3 of our agreement. She found the invoice an hour later and absolutely lost her mind. "There's no Section 4.3, she screamed through my door. I opened the door calmly and showed her the agreement, pointing to the exact clause she'd signed without reading. "Right here," I said. Section 4.3 clearly states that personal property may not be relocated or utilized without explicit written permission. Violation of this clause incurs a $75 administrative fee. "You're insane," she hissed. "I'm detail-oriented," I corrected. "There's a difference." Friday came and Rebecca didn't come home. She crashed at Megan's place, according to a text she sent me at 2 in the morning that just said staying at a friend's. "Don't worry about me." I wasn't worried. I was packing. But Saturday morning, she returned with reinforcements. I was in the kitchen making coffee when I heard multiple car doors slamming outside. Rebecca walked in first, followed by her father Gregory and her younger brother Marcus. Gregory was a large man, probably 6'3", with the kind of build that suggested he'd done physical labor his whole life. He looked at me with open hostility. "You need to be reasonable about this situation," Gregory announced, crossing his arms across his chest in what I'm sure he thought was an intimidating manner. "I am being reasonable," I replied, taking a sip of my coffee. "Would you like some coffee? I just made a fresh pot." "My daughter can't afford to stay here alone," he continued, ignoring my offer. "You know that. You're putting her in an impossible position. Then she should make alternative living arrangements," I suggested pleasantly. "She has a steady income, presumably some savings, and 20 days remaining to find a suitable new residence. That's plenty of time. She shouldn't have to uproot her entire life because you're being petty," Gregory argued, his voice rising. "She uprooted our relationship," I countered, my voice remaining level. "I'm simply following her lead and establishing my own independent living situation, which I'm entitled to do as an autonomous adult." Marcus tried to get in my face, stepping forward with the kind of aggressive posturing that probably worked on people who were easily intimidated. "You're really going to leave a woman homeless? That's the kind of man you are?" I looked at him with something approaching pity. "She has a job that pays approximately $42,000 annually," I stated. "She has savings, or she should if she's been financially responsible. She has parents who clearly care about her well-being, as evidenced by your presence here. And she has 20 days to secure alternative housing, which is more than enough time in a city with numerous rental options in various price ranges. She's not homeless. She's an adult facing the consequences of her own decisions. You're supposed to protect her," Gregory shouted, his face reddening. "From what?" I asked, genuinely confused. "From the outcomes of her own choices? From the reality that actions have consequences? I'm not her father. I'm not her guardian. I'm her ex-boyfriend and current roommate who is exercising his legal right to end a living arrangement that isn't working for him." "What kind of man are you?" Gregory demanded. "The kind who respects when a woman explicitly says she wants independence and space," I replied. "The kind who takes people at their word instead of assuming they don't mean what they say. The kind who expects adults to be accountable for their decisions." They left about 20 minutes later after more circular arguments that went nowhere. Rebecca was sobbing in her room, dramatic heaving sobs that were probably meant to be heard through the walls. I felt bad for exactly 2.3 seconds, until I remembered that she'd literally engineered this entire situation, asked for this specific arrangement, and was now upset that I was treating her exactly how she'd requested to be treated. That evening, she posted on social media. I didn't see it initially, but my phone started blowing up around 8 p.m. with messages from mutual friends and acquaintances. I finally looked at her post. It was a long, emotional paragraph about her abusive ex-boyfriend who was making her homeless because he couldn't handle a strong, independent woman needing space to grow. She painted herself as the victim of financial abuse, emotional manipulation, and male fragility. The comment section was full of supportive messages from people who didn't know the full story, calling me everything from toxic to dangerous. I sat there for a moment, considering my options. I could engage, could defend myself, could post my own version of events, or I could let her have her moment of social media martyrdom while I focused on moving forward with my life. I chose the latter, but with one small addition. I posted my own update, short and factual. "Interesting how taking a relationship break means I still have to pay 70% of her expenses. Anyway, who needs a roommate? I'm moving to a great new place end of the month." The comments section on my post exploded. Mutual friends started asking questions, connecting dots, realizing that maybe Rebecca's victim narrative didn't quite add up. People who knew both of us started taking sides, with the battle lines being drawn based on who'd actually bothered to ask about both perspectives versus who'd just accepted Rebecca's version at face value. But here's the truly magnificent cherry on top of this entire situation. 3 different people messaged me about needing a roommate. One was a guy from my climbing gym who was looking to move closer to work. Another was a woman from my office who was going through a divorce and needed a place quickly. And the third message was from someone named Sophia, who I didn't initially recognize until I opened the message and saw her profile picture. Sophia was Tristan's ex-girlfriend. "Hey," her message read, "saw you need a roommate. Weird coincidence, I need one too. My ex just started dating someone new and I need him out ASAP. "Wanna grab coffee and talk?" I stared at that message for a solid 5 minutes, my brain slowly processing the implications. Then I started laughing, really laughing, the kind of laughter that comes from the universe deciding to hand you the most poetic justice imaginable on a silver platter. We met for coffee the next afternoon at a place halfway between our current apartments. Sophia was around my age, maybe early 30s, with the kind of direct communication style I immediately appreciated. She didn't waste time with small talk. "So your ex is dating Tristan," she said, stirring sugar into her latte. "And your ex is Tristan," I confirmed. She nodded. "We'd been on a break for about 3 months. He told me he needed time to work on himself, needed to figure out who he was outside of a relationship. We kept living together because breaking the lease early would have been expensive and we figured we were mature enough to handle it." "Sounds familiar," I said dryly. She pulled out her phone and showed me text messages between her and Tristan from 4 weeks ago, right around the time Rebecca had suggested our break. He was asking Sophia if she'd be cool with him having friends over sometimes, specifically female friends, because he was trying to expand his social circle and didn't want her to feel weird about it. Sophia had said sure, whatever, they weren't together anymore so he could do what he wanted. We compared notes, matching timelines, filling in gaps. The picture that emerged was crystal clear. Tristan had been playing both of us, or rather, playing Rebecca while keeping Sophia as his backup option, living in a nice apartment she helped pay for while he explored other possibilities. He told Rebecca he lived alone. He'd been having Sophia stay at her sister's place whenever Rebecca was supposed to come over, making up family emergencies or sister bonding time as excuses. The nuclear bomb dropped when Sophia came home early from what Tristan had strongly suggested should be a week-long visit to help her sister with some made-up crisis. She'd walked into their apartment to find women's underwear in their bed, not her underwear. She'd confronted Tristan. He'd tried to spin some story about doing laundry for a friend, but she'd found text messages on his iPad that he'd forgotten to lock. Messages with Rebecca, planning dates, him complaining about his roommate situation being complicated but assuring Rebecca it would work itself out soon. Sophia was done. She wanted Tristan out, but she couldn't afford their apartment alone. I needed a roommate for my new place. The solution seemed almost too perfect. "This is messy," I said carefully, thinking through the implications. "Or poetic," she replied with a slight smile. "Look, I get it if you don't want to get involved in more drama. But I'm employed, I have good credit, I pay my bills on time, and I'm not looking for anything except a respectful roommate who does the same. Plus, I really, really want to see the look on Tristan's face when he finds out." I considered it. Really considered it. Was this revenge? Absolutely. Was it also a practical solution that met both of our legitimate housing needs? Also yes. We spent another hour discussing logistics, expectations, living habits. She was neat, quiet, worked from home 2 days a week, didn't party, wanted a drama-free living situation. It was honestly one of the most straightforward roommate discussions I'd ever had. We agreed to think about it for 24 hours and then make a decision. Meanwhile, back at the apartment I currently shared with Rebecca, the situation had escalated to what I can only describe as DEFCON 1 levels of chaos. She'd apparently decided that if I wasn't going to cave to her demands, she'd make my remaining time in the apartment as miserable as possible. She used all of my coffee pods, $63 worth of premium dark roast that I'd bought the week before. She borrowed my laptop charger and claimed she lost it, forcing me to buy a new one for $85. She invited 12 people over for a party on a Wednesday night without any notice, let alone asking permission. They stayed until 3:30 in the morning, playing music so loud I could feel the bass vibrating through my bedroom floor. She started parking in my assigned parking spot, forcing me to park on the street. Every single violation I documented meticulously. Every single expense she caused, I added to her invoice. She ignored them all, deleting my Venmo requests without responding. Then came Monday of week 3, and I received a text from an unknown number. "Hey man, this is Tristan. We should talk. Meet me at Barley's Pub on 7th at 8 tonight." I showed up at 7:45, ordered a beer, and waited. Tristan arrived right at 8, looking exactly like I'd imagined. Tall, stylishly disheveled in that way that takes actual effort to achieve, wearing the kind of casually expensive clothes that scream, I work in marketing. He ordered a craft IPA and sat down across from me with the kind of easy confidence that probably worked on most people. Thanks for meeting me, he said, sliding a beer toward me like we were old friends. Look, I know this whole situation has been weird. I just wanted to say, man to man, that I respect how cool you've been about everything. I stared at him, genuinely amazed at the audacity. Cool about what exactly? You know, the whole break thing with Rebecca. He took a long drink. She's great, but she's intense. She kind of pushed this whole break thing, honestly. I just wanted something casual, and she took it way more seriously than I expected. I nodded slowly, taking a sip of my beer. Interesting perspective. Yeah, well, he shrugged. Anyway, I heard you're moving out. That's probably smart. Clean break and all that. I smiled. Actually, I'm moving in with a new roommate. Someone I think you might know. His expression flickered with confusion. Oh yeah? Who? Sophia. I've never seen someone's face drain of color that quickly. His beer froze halfway to his mouth. You talked to Sophia? She might be my new roommate, I confirmed, enjoying every second of his panic. She needs a place, I need a roommate. It works out perfectly. You can't do that, he stammered, setting his beer down hard enough to slosh foam over the rim. You can't move in with my ex. That's crossing a line. Your ex that you're still living with, I pointed out, while dating my ex. The one whose bed you brought other women into. That ex? That's different, he protested weakly. How exactly is it different? He couldn't answer. He just sat there, his mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping for air, desperately trying to formulate an argument that would make his situation sound reasonable while mine sounded inappropriate. The silence stretched between us, thick with his growing panic and my absolute satisfaction. Rebecca is going to lose her mind if you do this, he finally managed, reaching for his beer with a hand that trembled slightly. This is cruel, man. You're just trying to hurt her. I'm making a practical housing decision with someone who has excellent references, stable employment, and similar expectations for a respectful living environment, I replied calmly. The fact that it bothers you or Rebecca is entirely irrelevant to my decision-making process. You both wanted independence and space to explore other options. Well, congratulations. I'm being independent and exploring my options. You're evil, he muttered, standing abruptly and pulling out his wallet. I'm practical, I corrected, echoing the exact word Rebecca had used when she first suggested our arrangement. Just like you claimed to be when you were living with your ex while pursuing mine. He threw a 20 on the table and left without another word, pulling out his phone before he'd even made it to the door. I knew exactly who was calling. 23 minutes later, I was still finishing my beer and scrolling through apartment listings on my phone when Rebecca came bursting through the pub door like a hurricane given human form. Her eyes were wild, her hair disheveled, and she was breathing hard like she'd run the entire 6 blocks from our apartment. She spotted me immediately and stormed over, loud enough that every head in the bar turned to watch the impending scene. You're moving in with his ex, she screeched, not caring that we had an audience of at least 30 people. Are you insane? Are you trying to destroy me? I'm considering a roommate arrangement with someone who meets my criteria for a compatible living situation, I said quietly, hoping she'd lower her voice. My housing decisions are no longer your concern. This is about revenge, she hissed, leaning over the table. You're doing this specifically to hurt me. Actually, it's about finding a roommate who pays their bills on time, respects shared spaces, and understands basic roommate etiquette, I replied. The fact that Sophia happens to be Tristan's ex is simply a coincidence. Bullshit, she spat. You're doing this because you're petty and vindictive and you can't handle that I wanted something different. I set down my phone and looked at her directly, really looked at her, seeing the person she'd become or maybe always had been underneath the version I'd loved. You asked for a break but wanted to keep living together and keep all the financial benefits of our relationship, I said slowly, clearly. You wanted to date someone else while I continued funding your lifestyle. When I treated you exactly like you asked to be treated, like a roommate instead of a partner, you called it abuse. When I decided to move out because our living situation wasn't working, you called it abandonment. Now I'm making a practical decision about who to share my new apartment with, and you're calling it revenge. Do you see a pattern here? You want all the freedom to make choices, but you don't want any of the consequences that come with those choices. I will make your life hell, she threatened, her voice shaking with rage. "You already are," I pointed out. "At least with Sophia, the rent will be paid on time, and I won't have to listen to performatively loud sex through the walls at 2 in the morning." She grabbed my beer and threw it at the wall. The glass shattered, amber liquid and foam sliding down onto the floor. The entire bar went silent. The bartender was already reaching for the phone. I calmly pulled out my phone, took a photo of the broken glass and the spreading puddle, and added $35 to her invoice tab for destruction of property and replacement beverage. Then I stood, dropped $40 on the table for my tab and the mess, and walked out while Rebecca stood there breathing heavily, surrounded by staring strangers. The next day, I signed the lease with Sophia. We met at the new apartment, went through the space together, discussed furniture arrangements and household rules. It was refreshingly straightforward. No drama, no hidden agendas, just two adults making practical decisions about shared living space. We wrote up our own roommate agreement, both of us having learned the importance of clear written expectations. She signed it without complaint. We shook hands, and that was that. But I'd be lying if I said the karma wasn't delicious, because it absolutely was. The following Friday, Sophia served Tristan with formal eviction papers. 30 days to vacate the premises, all legally proper and filed through her lawyer. Apparently, when she dug deeper into their lease, she discovered that he'd forged her signature on the most recent renewal without telling her, which made the entire lease voidable. Her lawyer had field day with that little revelation. Tristan tried to move in with Rebecca, showed up at our apartment with 3 suitcases and a desperate expression. I was there when it happened, packing boxes in my room with the door open. I heard him explaining his situation, heard him begging her to let him stay just until he found a place. And I heard her response. "You can't stay here," she said, panic evident in her voice. "I can't get approved for this apartment on my own. My credit isn't good enough, my income isn't high enough, and I still owe them money from the damage deposit situation. The landlord already told me I need to either find a qualified cosigner or find a new place." "What about your parents?" Tristan suggested desperately. "My dad said absolutely not after the scene last week," she admitted. "He said I made my bed and now I need to lie in it." Those were his exact words. "So what are you going to do?" Tristan asked. "I don't know," she practically wailed. "I've been looking at places, but everything in my price range is either a terrible neighborhood or has roommates who seem sketchy. I can't afford anything decent on my salary alone." And that's when I heard it. The moment of realization. The moment when they both understood simultaneously that they destroyed their respective safety nets for a relationship that was built on deception and convenience rather than anything real. "Maybe we could get a place together," Tristan suggested weakly. "With what deposit money?" Rebecca shot back. "I have $800 in savings. You just told me you have less than 1,000. First, last, and deposit on even a studio apartment would be at least $4,000. The conversation deteriorated from there into blaming, accusations, and recriminations. They both ended up moving back to their respective parents' houses. I know this because Rebecca's father came to pick up her stuff on moving day with a trailer, and his disappointment was almost palpable. My moving day was considerably more pleasant. Professional movers, everything packed and labeled, out in 3 hours. I did a final walkthrough with the landlord, showed him my documentation of every single incident, every violation, every damaged item. Rebecca had never bothered to clean up the wine stain on the carpet from her friend's night. She'd never repaired the hole in the wall from when she'd thrown her phone in a rage. The broken glass from the picture frame she'd caused to fall was still there, swept into a corner but not properly cleaned. The landlord surveyed the damage, looked at my meticulous documentation, and pulled out his calculator. "Miss Rebecca is going to owe approximately $650 beyond her security deposit," he said, shaking his head. "And I see here that you paid the full security deposit initially." I showed him the bank records proving I'd paid the entire $1,800 deposit, despite the agreement that we'd split it. She was supposed to reimburse me her half, but never did. He wrote me a check for $1,800 on the spot, my full deposit returned. Rebecca's portion would be withheld for damages, plus she'd receive a bill for the excess. I handed him his keys, shook his hand, and walked out of that apartment for the last time feeling lighter than I had in months. Life with Sophia turned out to be remarkably pleasant. We respected each other's boundaries, paid bills on time, kept shared spaces clean, and maintained appropriate roommate distance. We became friends, bonding over our mutual disaster relationships, but there was never anything romantic. We both needed stability and peace, not more drama. We had a strict no dating clause in our agreement, and neither of us had any desire to violate it. Tristan got kicked out of Sophia's apartment exactly 30 days after she served him papers. He tried to fight it, claimed he had rights as a tenant, but her lawyer demolished every argument he made, especially after the forged signature came to light. He ended up moving back to his mother's house 3 hours away, taking a remote position with his company so he wouldn't have to commute. Rebecca struggled to find an apartment she could afford. Her credit had taken hits from unpaid bills. Her rental history now included the damaged charges from our apartment, and her references were limited. She eventually found a place, but it was a studio in a rough neighborhood, and she was paying almost as much as she would have paid for half of our nice two-bedroom in the suburbs. She never paid her invoice. She ignored it, deleted the Venmo requests, blocked me when I sent formal demands. So I took her to small claims court. Filed all my documentation, all my evidence, showed up on the court date in a pressed shirt with a folder full of proof. She didn't show up, didn't even bother to appear or send a response. I won by default judgment. $1,547, plus court costs, plus accrued interest. The judge looked at my documentation, looked at the signed roommate agreement, and asked why the defendant hadn't bothered to appear if she had any defense. I shrugged. The judgment was entered into public record. Now Rebecca had that following her too, another black mark on her credit, another thing she'd have to explain to future landlords and creditors. Her friends mostly ended up taking my side after everything came out. Megan actually reached out to apologize about 6 months later. She admitted she'd only heard Rebecca's version initially, that she'd call me toxic without knowing the full story. She said Rebecca had borrowed money from all of them, promising to pay them back after she got settled, but none of them had seen a dime. Megan herself was owed $400. Lauren was owed $600. Isabella had paid for groceries multiple times and never been reimbursed. They all felt used, manipulated, and stupid for believing Rebecca's victim narrative without question. The truly magnificent conclusion came almost 8 months after I'd moved out. I was at a coffee shop near my apartment, working on my laptop, when I received a text from an unknown number. My heart didn't even race anymore. I'd changed my number twice to stop the harassment from Rebecca and her various supporters, but somehow messages still found their way through. This one was from Rebecca. I know you probably hate me, and you have every right to, but I've been doing a lot of therapy and self-reflection, and I realize now that I completely messed up everything. You were an amazing boyfriend, and I threw it all away for nothing. I was selfish and entitled, and I hurt you deeply. Can we talk? I'm not asking to get back together. I just want to apologize properly and maybe find some closure for both of us. I read it 3 times. I thought about responding with something cruel, something that would hurt her the way she'd hurt me. I thought about ignoring it completely. But then I remembered what my therapist had told me about closure, about how it's something you give yourself, not something you get from other people. I typed out a response. Per our signed agreement, all communication should be regarding outstanding debts only. You currently owe $3,247, including principal, interest, and legal fees from the small claims judgment. Payment plans are available. For all other matters, please contact your attorney. I hit send and immediately blocked the number. 3 minutes later, Sophia knocked on my bedroom door. She'd been in the kitchen making lunch and had apparently heard my phone buzz. You okay? She asked, concern evident in her voice. Yeah, I said, closing my laptop. Just Rebecca trying to apologize or get closure or something. What did you tell her? I showed Sophia the text exchange. She read it, started smiling, then started laughing so hard she had to lean against the doorframe for support. Oh my God, she managed between gasps. You're my hero. That's the most savage thing I've ever seen. My brother Jerome called it savage too when I told him the story. My mom called it brilliant and said she was proud of me for standing my ground. My dad, a man of few words but infinite wisdom, just nodded and said, never date someone who can't do basic math, son. If they can't calculate that actions have consequences, they're going to be expensive in more ways than one. The best update came about 2 months after that text exchange. I started dating someone new. Her name was Scarlett, and I'd met her at my climbing gym. She was a physical therapist, smart, funny, financially independent, and emotionally mature. We'd been friends for a few months before either of us admitted there might be something more there. Our first real date was at a nice Italian restaurant downtown. Over tiramisu and espresso, I told her the whole story. Every detail, every invoice, every moment of the roommate agreement saga. I expected her to be shocked, maybe even horrified that I'd been so calculated and cold. Instead, she laughed so hard she nearly choked on her coffee. When she finally caught her breath, she looked at me with something like admiration. "Just so we are clear," she said, her eyes sparkling with amusement. "If we ever get serious enough to move in together, and I suddenly decide I want a break but still want to live with you and have you pay most of the bills while I explore other options, I will absolutely pack my stuff and move out. I took algebra in high school. I understand how splitting costs works. I think I fell a little bit in love with her right then. You know what the most satisfying part of this whole experience was? It wasn't the money, though getting that judgment did feel good. It wasn't even the poetic justice of ending up roommates with Sophia, though that was admittedly delicious. The most satisfying part was realizing that I didn't need to be the person who bent and compromised and sacrificed endlessly to make someone else happy. I could set boundaries. I could expect equal partnership. I could walk away from situations that didn't serve me. And I could do all of that without being the villain in someone else's story, even if they tried desperately to cast me in that role. Rebecca wanted independence without responsibility. Tristan wanted options without consequences. They both wanted the freedom to make selfish choices without having to face any negative outcomes. And when reality came knocking with a bill in hand, they both crumbled under the weight of their own decisions. Meanwhile, I learned that self-respect isn't selfish. Boundaries aren't punishment. And sometimes the most loving thing you can do for yourself is refuse to be someone's safety net while they test out other trampolines. To everyone who said I was too harsh, that I was being vindictive, that I should have just accepted Rebecca's terms because that's what you do when you love someone, she literally asked for this arrangement. She signed a contract. She wanted to be treated like a roommate instead of a partner. I simply honored her explicitly stated wishes and treated her exactly how she requested. If the natural consequences of her choices felt like punishment, that says more about the quality of her decisions than it does about my character. And before anyone asks, yes, this is all completely legal. Yes, I kept every piece of documentation. Yes, the roommate agreement was enforceable, as demonstrated by the small claims court judgment. No, I don't feel bad about any of it. Play stupid games, win stupid prizes. And sometimes, just sometimes, the prize is learning that actions have consequences, bills need to be paid, and you can't have your cake, eat it too, and then complain when someone asks you to pay for your half of the cake. Scarlett and I are still together, 18 months later now. We don't live together yet, both of us preferring to take things slow after our respective disasters. But when we do eventually move in together, it'll be as equal partners who respect each other's boundaries, communicate clearly, and understand that love isn't about one person sacrificing everything while the other takes whatever they want. And if that day ever comes when she says she needs space or wants to take a break, I'll respect her enough to actually give her space, not stick around as her financial sponsor while she figures herself out. Because real independence means being actually independent, not just independent from commitment while still dependent on someone else's wallet. That's the real lesson here. Not that I was cruel or calculated or cold, but that respect means respecting what people say they want, even when they don't really understand what they're asking for. Rebecca said she wanted to be roommates. So I was the best damn roommate agreement enforcer the world has ever seen. She just didn't expect that being roommates meant actually being roommates, with all the equal responsibility and financial independence that comes with it. Turns out, wanting to have your cake and eat it too requires a budget that can actually afford cake. Who knew?